Mike, Milton, these are two of the best guys in the business. I love them. I've known them for years, and they're going to tell us about some roof tech products and things that you've known and things that you might not yet know. We have a few slides, but Milton and Mike, maybe you could talk a little bit about what we'll be addressing today, and let me know when you want me to switch to the first slide.
Cool. I'll let you know about the slides. Thanks for having us again. We're definitely happy to be back. One of the major topics that I'd like to discuss today is why now in the market is better than ever before to switch over to railless from rail. After that, I want to talk about basically our attachment processes, what separates us from the rest, and also how much different we are when it comes to the attachment abilities that we have been successful over the past almost 30 years. And then outside of that, we talk about a few things, whatever comes up. But let's start with the railless. So uniquely right now in the industry, it's the first time in the past 6 years that I've been doing this that railless now has clear advantages over rail when it comes to cost. And this is just recent development, you know. So if you look at the cost of aluminum over the past 2 years, it's increased over 57%. Also, the cost of logistics, shipping rails has increased over 400% or 5 times. These are huge factors. So at this point in time, this is really the first time that roof tech is getting people calling us about going railless, which, you know, as you guys know, railless is something that really has to be pushed. But we're seeing this huge success, so this is really great. And also just further justifies why we see the top 10 contractors in the nation have been doing railless for the past 3 to 4 or 5 years. They've already realized this on the large scale about the logistics and the cost of aluminum, and then also getting every penny out of your racking. You know, racking is, you know, anywhere between 8 and 20 cents a watt, but a lot of times you end up throwing some of those pennies away with having to do cut rails. So with railless, you get to use every single bit of the money that you have allocated in your budget for racking.
You know, and one other thing I'll throw in there is from the logistics cost, we see rail damage all the time, especially when you're shipping a smaller bundle to a remote location, and it's almost impossible to get those trucking companies to provide any compensation for the damage, and you've got to ship more rail by that same crappy trucking company to the same site. So it's, I'll tell you, the logistics savings of a railless product like what you folks have is really significant.
You're absolutely correct. And also, it's not just the contractors, too, that are having these complaints. It's the distributors as well. Simple things like storage. So all of these things, like distributors really want to go railless as much as possible. They're just kind of waiting for the industry to be ready for it, mainly the contractors. And ultimately what it comes down to is now that we've got the pricing thing worked out, it's about change. And that's what Roof Tech is really kind of doing. They're the educating company of how to educate people on, like, let's facilitate this change to go from rail to railless. So we can absolutely talk about that all day, but go ahead.
But we got to talk about what makes you folks interesting, unique, and innovators in the industry, and it really comes down to what we're looking at on screen, right?
Yes. What are we looking at on screen?
Okay,
so let's start with that. Yeah, let's start with that. So let's start with the butyl. So we have a Roof Tech proprietary butyl now called Alpha Seal. In the past couple of years, we got a little bit better about our marketing and branding. But this is the same product, the same sealant that we've been using for almost 30 years. And we actually have test facilities that have been up that long. We also have installs that have been up that long, mainly in Japan, as we talked about before. In the US, we're running about 10 years using our butyl-based flashing, starting in 2012. Of course, as many of you have already heard from Roof Tech over and over again, we're one of the most certified companies out there and have done an extreme amount of testing, mainly all revolving around this butyl. For those of you who have not seen it in person, this is the Apex railless product. This is actually a mid-clamp. Our butyl-based flashing comes pre-attached to the bottom. This universal attachment, universal sealant, is good for all spokes.
Could you hold that up again, just so we can take a closer look at it? Because you've got good stuff to show off. Show them how the mounting holes look on the top.
Yeah, I've got a good sear. I'm actually able to make those a little bit more better. Okay, so this is actually our mini flashing. So, you know, when we started to do railless in 2012 here in the US, it wasn't a very big market. So we took our same flashing technology, put an elephant on top of it, and now we got a flashing for rail so that everyone can benefit from this. Now, one of the key things here with developing this product is actually that screw pattern. As some of you know, we have a couple different options. We have a rafter-based attachment, which I'll quickly show this piece. This is our rafter screw going into a rafter. The allotment there on a 3/16 lag bolt that doesn't need to be pre-caulked or pre-drilled. You have almost 7/8 of that inch of that rafter to hit to achieve that structural viability.
That's by the way, a really nice feature that you've got there.
Yes, this is a big difference. Just so everyone gets what we're talking about, that's actually a 5/16 lag bolt, which everyone is really used to. And for someone to accurately hit that middle 33% is pretty hard, and also takes at least more than one pilot hole, which, by the way, the #1 leak in the country over the past 3 or 4 years has been unflashed pilot holes. So by not having to do a pilot hole for this product, we eliminate that possibility of water intrusion. But this is, like you said, a great visual. In order for you to actually achieve structural viability with the 5/16 lag bolt is extremely difficult. So we make that easy. Also, so that anyone can really learn how to do solar. It's also great for do-it-yourselfers, for at home to do solar. It's perfect. Now, this is just with using the rafter. Back to the screw pattern that we have on the Mini. We have this specific screw pattern for decking attachments, and we test all the way down to 7/16 OSB, half-inch plywood, and above. So one of the key things to remember here, mind you, that these are the rafter screw mounts, 2 screws, no pre-drill, no pre-caulk. But if you'll notice, these other mounting holes, it's a 5-hole pattern in a horseshoe shape, but they're not in line. So just really quickly, let me segue to decking attachments, and Rooftek's been doing decking attachments for a very long time. We're seeing a lot of other manufacturers getting into decking attachments, and we try to educate people as much as possible how to choose a proper decking attachment. So there's 3 things that really go wrong or could go wrong in decking attachments. #1, most common, you end up stripping out your screws. You guys are used to using impact drills, which we do not recommend pretty much across the board. So that's #1. Try to use a variable speed drill with a light touch. Our manual says that we only need to get that metal washer to touch the top of the metal base, and that's enough torque. So stripping out screws is something that it needs to be watched out for. Now, with the 5-hole pattern, our engineering report actually already takes away 1 screw worth of value. So all of our pre-engineered reports, which is a great thing to look at on our website with our maximum span calculator, but those 5 holes, only 4 of them are actually for the PE report, Jeff.
And I looked at that calculator the other day, and I have to say it was impressive, Mike. Your span calculator and your online tools really have improved dramatically in recent
online estimator
time. So my compliments.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It's really good, and Milton has been a part of that since day 1 for us, with making sure that our PE reports are up to date and qualified. We also use SML, which is a very experienced solar engineering company. Okay, now 5-screw hole pattern. We only use 4 of those screws for actual values to compensate for at least 1 screw being stripped out or into a bad part of the sheathing, a rotted part of the sheathing. So the second thing that could go wrong is when you're looking at decking attachments that have in-line hole placements, you run the risk of actually having 2 of those screws go into the sheathing butts. As you know, sheathing butts can run horizontal between the rafters. And if you lose a screw in there, you lose the value of that screw. So that's why we're offset. So you can only use 1 at a time, not 2. The third thing that is the most common fault or the most common mistake made for decking attachments is not doing an attic inspection. Sometimes this is done by the salesperson. Sometimes this is done by a project manager, but it needs to be verified for a few different reasons. #1, identifying what type. Is it OSB? Is it plywood? They have different structural values. Secondly, quality. You want to look for mold, rot, water intrusions. If there's any type of deflections, you're going to have to account for that. And then also, too, I've got a few pictures of this. I'm sorry I didn't share, but tongue and groove is probably one of the worst substrates to actually attach to when it comes to decking attachment. I know a lot of people wouldn't think so because tongue and groove is 3/4 inch thick, right? But really what it comes down to is how many attachment points. Each plank usually only has 2 screws or nails in each rafter, and ultimately that doesn't lead to very good uplift. So the OSB and the plywood actually have better ratings than tongue and groove. So keep that in mind, everybody, when you're doing decking attachments. Attic inspections, watch out for strip screws.
And I'll just state from the standpoint of living in Arizona, and most of the time I've ever had to go up into the attic is August, and it's horrible, but very important. because there's a lot of things you learn when you're crawling around in those dirty, hot attics. Make sure you have somebody on the ground, check it in to make sure you're not passed out up there. But it's some interesting points you bring up, Mike. And that whole pattern that you've got in your attachment, that's the standard now? Because you used to have one that didn't have that stagger?
Correct, yes. Our first version of the product in the US actually did have inline mounts with only 4 screws. And we actually updated that, changed that to be the 5-screw pattern to, one, eliminate 1 screw, just automatic, just for safety factor. And then secondly, not to have that loss of 2 screws.
Yeah. That was the first railless in the US, but also it has, multiple mounts, 4 mounts per panel. So we could afford that.
Just one other question I'm curious about: when you're doing deck attachment, I've got to imagine that can speed up the whole process of the installation.
Oh, yeah. Right. So decking attachment by far is going to be a faster solution. There's 2 reasons why for this. Because number one, the most common thing when people think about decking attachments versus rafter attachments is, hey, I'm going to have to use more penetrations. And the answer is mostly yes, although we do have plenty of regions in the US to where you can get a 4-foot span on OSB or a 4-foot span on plywood, mainly in the South. The number one reducer of span for decking attachments is downforce. Upforce is actually a little less impact, but of course it does matter. So, one thing, having more mounts is not a bad thing, especially when you're using our product, which is a waterproof backing product. It's not about how many mounts or how many penetrations, it's about the quality of that penetration. So, increasing the amount of penetrations is absolutely okay. And secondly, speed. Our mounts, because they go right on top, no pre-drill, no pre-caulk, are about 5-to-1 ratio. So decking attachments are faster than rafter attachments and easier to use. 1 minute left. I just want to mention a few more things about railless, okay? So railless with our system, besides our universal flashing that can be attached to any roof slope or any roof type, metal, asphalt, EPDM, TPOs, they can be submerged underwater on 0-degree pitches or 0-degree slopes. Secondly, we have a universal attachment anywhere between 30 and 40 millimeters without a single adjustment tool. We also have an 1.5-inch leveling ability. That's what this large screw right there is for. We have a 3.5-inch maneuverability here, as well as built-in wire management channels. A few railless things that people steer away from: wire management, leveling, and then basically just a lack of change. So wire management's addressed, most of it's done on the ground. So it's actually safer to use railless because most of your time is spent on the ground, less time on the roof.
And I just want to remind you all that because of these wood screws, being probably the youngest wrecking company in the US at 10 years, I'm sure we have the most roof penetrations in the industry and probably the lowest ratio of issues due to leaks.
That's a very good point. There's over 40 million of our screws in the US since 2012. 40 million.
Well, I'm a supporter of the development of your products. I think you're doing some excellent work in the industry, and thank you so much for talking a little bit about your products today, Milton, Mike. I'll look forward to seeing you at the next event.